Hey everybody, welcome back to the Michael Lofton show here on Reason Theology. I would love to interact with some feedback and responses that Brian Holdsworth offered on his channel yesterday in relation to some interaction that I had with some of his content. If you're not familiar, a few days ago, he posted a video about Bishop Strickland, and he mentioned me in part of that video. And so I did a video responding to it and interacting with it the other day. And Brian then responded to that one yesterday. And here I am interacting with this other one. I think this will probably be the end of the of the cycle here. And what I hope to do is kind of fill in the gaps. And I think what will take place is I'll be able to demonstrate kind of the other side of the story and perhaps some other information that hasn't been considered here. Just at the outset, I can tell, especially in the response that Brian offered to me, that he's a good guy. So it seems like a good guy, seems sincere. I have no reason to believe otherwise. So I believe he's of goodwill. And it seems like a guy I could sit down with, have a cup of coffee or a beer with, and really get along with and have a productive conversation. So I honestly do feel that he and I probably see eye to eye on probably 98% of things. And there might be some, 1 to 2% that we would need to have a discussion on. And I can tell from the video that he did, which I'll respond to here in a moment, that he's operating with some incomplete information. And so I'm hoping to fill the gap and offer some more information that will hopefully not only give him some additional things to think about and reconsider, but also will provide the audience with the opportunity to do the same if anybody in the audience is also perhaps operating with some incomplete information. So that is what I intend to do today. I'm going to start with the 2-minute 52-second mark of his response video that he posted yesterday. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we're going to dive in. This section is where he talks a little bit about his initial video, where he mentioned me. That's kind of what triggered this discussion. I've never spoken about Brian before in the past. It was, again, a video that he did a few days back, and then he mentioned me by name and addressed one of my videos. And, I expressed some of my concerns about his comments that he made there. So let's go ahead and kind of get his take and his side of the story there and see just a little bit more where he was coming from. And I'll perhaps interact a little bit with that. Okay, so let's go ahead and begin.
Hopefully leave it at that. One bit of confusion that really struck me as I was watching Michael's video was that it seemed to me that he was under the impression that my video was a response video to one of his videos or something that he had said. And that's actually definitely not the case. The purpose of my video wasn't to go through a detailed analysis of all the things that have happened and in the wash of all of that, assess what's the right thing or what's the logical conclusion to all of this. And it definitely wasn't in reply to him. As I had said in my other video, it was unscripted, which isn't something I do a lot, but I wanted something of my heart to come through in what I was trying to say. And that's true of this video as well. I'm trying to do that again. So forgive me if this is clumsy and a bit disjointed. But as I was speaking in that unscripted way, it popped into my head that there was a portion of one of Michael's videos in which he was giving a platform to some people that really, really bothered me. And I just kind of blurted that out. And so he said that, well, that was sort of a low or a slow pitch thing where you didn't address the rest of my arguments. And it's like, yeah, fine. I didn't want to address the rest of your arguments because it wasn't a rebuttal video against you. I had mentioned in my last video that
let me maybe stop there. I definitely want to clarify that no, I was not under the impression that he was doing a rebuttal video to my video. That was never my concern. I apologize if I gave that impression. My original concern that I expressed originally in response to that was not that this was somehow a rebuttal video to me, but the comments that he made about my video were incredibly misleading. I'm sure unintentionally, but were incredibly misleading because he responded to a very, very, I think, weak criticism against Strickland in the video, while not addressing the other issues that I brought up in that video that are directly relevant to what Brian is discussing. So it's not as if I'm asking him to respond to something that's not relevant to what he's discussing. That would be unfair. The other issues that I addressed were directly relevant to what Brian had presented in response to my video by name. And so I felt that that is very misleading to the audience because it did not take into consideration the really more substantive arguments that I had offered. So just wanted to clear that up. And, you know, I get being unscripted. I totally get that because I do this video right now live. What you're watching is in live time. This is happening right now. I'm looking at y'all in the comment section. I can see what you're saying. In my live video that I did in response to Brian the other day, Brian came into the comment section and I directly interacted with Brian live right in front of everybody to view. So I totally get, you know, sometimes whenever you're speaking off the cuff, goodness, I certainly know I would perhaps phrase some things better if I perhaps maybe had something scripted or perhaps had the opportunity to edit a video. I would rephrase things. Now, I'm under the impression that Brian, perhaps he recorded that unscripted, but I'm under the impression that Brian uploaded that video with it being edited. It very clearly was edited and did not seem to have been done live. And so though I can totally give a pass for somebody speaking off the cuff unscripted, that would only work if somebody is speaking live. Now, if you're deliberately posting something with forethought and intention in advance and uploading it to YouTube in an edited form, I don't know if the unscripted part really gets a pass at that point. But to me, that's not that big of an issue. I wasn't that concerned about that. I'm more concerned about the lack of engagement with directly relevant information in the video that he was critiquing that was not brought up, that is, again, directly relevant to what Brian was addressing. And I think I brought that out in my previous video. So let's maybe go to the 5-minute mark. And he talks a little bit more about that interview that I read with Father Kelly from the Diocese of Tyler, Texas. And it gave me a little bit more insight into where Brian is coming from and what some of his original concerns were. And so I understand him a little bit better why he's a little bit more concerned about that interview that I read on my channel from Father Brian. But I do want to offer some counterpoints that I think he needs to consider. Let's watch it together. You should be able to see it on your screen right around now.
Need to be given the responsibilities that he bears, but he is a person of goodwill. He is a person who loves Jesus, which, as I said in my last video, if that's you, then we're on the same team. And simultaneously, I was informed about some of these people who have been working against him, and the stories made my skin crawl. The kinds of corruption and scandal that we've become so familiar with in the church that I just... it's infuriating. It's evil. It's so disgustingly evil. And to know that some of these same personalities are now taking their victory lap, and that people like you, Michael, I'm not blaming you for this. I'm not saying you did this deliberately or maliciously, but they've been given a platform on your channel. And that popped into my mind as I was talking about it. And I just said, that bugs me. And then I moved on with the rest of my commentary. So that's the only reason your name appeared there, and it was spontaneous. And I apologize for calling you out. It wasn't meant to be like a denunciation of you or your position. So
that helps give a little bit more insight. It sounds like that interview that I read about Father Kelly, again, a priest from the Diocese of Tyler, Texas, expressing some of his concerns about his former bishop, Bishop Strickland. It sounds like what Brian is saying is that he is privy to some inside information in reference to Father Kelly and others. And so when he sees me reading a interview about Father Kelly on my platform, I'm unintentionally and unknowingly, giving a platform to somebody that he believes behind the scenes is engaged in nefarious acts. And that is his term that he used in a community post, if I recall correctly. He did use the term nefarious. And here it seems like he's saying this is just very, very sick stuff that he is privy to. Look, I'm not in a position to say whether that is accurate or not. But I do know this. I would simply caution Brian and say, okay, look, one man's side of the story sounds right until another man comes and cross-examines him. That's, again, Proverbs 18:17. The one who states his case first seems right until the other comes and examines him. If you're getting one side of the story, it could sound like a Father Kelly or somebody else out there. You might be hearing some really horrible things about them that portrays them in a certain way, but I would just caution one and say, you might maybe want to talk to Father Kelly or somebody on his side or anybody else that he perhaps has in mind and hear their side of the story, because then you might find out, yeah, it wasn't so clear cut as before. And so I would just caution Brian, if you've heard some things behind the scenes and you're concerned with some people, okay, I could totally understand that, but you also need to take into account it could be that you're hearing a very skewed version of events. You might even be hearing malicious slander, and you might be buying into that. I'm not saying that he has. I'm saying that you have to hear both sides of the story and take those into account. And I don't know if Brian has done that. Maybe he has. Maybe he has spoken to Father Kelly or someone from his side, and maybe others that he has in mind here. Maybe he has, but I just want to offer that caution just in case here. So I don't think there was anything wrong with me reading Father Kelly's side. Again, if Brian is privy to some inside information, well, okay. But maybe there's some other inside information that Brian isn't familiar with, which gives a very different perception if we were to evaluate him or someone else. And so I would just, again, caution him on that part, not to be too quick to jump the gun and take a person's side of the story. Okay, so let's perhaps go to the 6-minute mark. And let's review a couple comments that Brian makes here.
So Michael, in his rebuttal to me, said that if I'm going to weigh in, I have to go through all the evidence. I have to take the time to make that case as sound and as airtight as possible. I have to show evidence on the screen and everything. Unfortunately, I don't have the production setup that he has, so I actually have no way of doing that kind of thing. But again, that wasn't really the purpose of my video. And simultaneously,
and let me maybe just stop there and interact with that. I understand that, but again, if you are directly critiquing something that I said, specifically, I'm offering an interview that Father Kelly gave to me with his thoughts about Strickland. If you're going to criticize that, it's directly relevant that you address some of the other issues that I raised in that video. That was my concern. And that wasn't done. And therefore, the audience who watched Brian's view got one particular impression. And that's unfortunate, because, again, one man's case seems a certain way until another man comes and cross-examines him. A lot of the people who watched just Brian's response video and perhaps haven't watched this video right now, they're going to get one side of the story and a very different impression until they come over here, hopefully, and watch the other side, and they get more information. Then they say, okay, yeah, that does kind of change the story. Brian had me thinking it was one way, but I didn't take into account this other information. That does change my perspective. That's what I'm going to be doing in this video. So that was all I was saying there, as far as I think it would be helpful if Brian maybe brought up on the screen what I actually said, what Father Kelly said, and consider the direct context and everything else that, again, has bearing on that discussion, and present that to the audience so that the audience gets a fuller picture of the situation. That was kind of my concern there. Let's go to the 7-minute 20-second mark. We're going to talk about Bishop Strickland at the Dodgers Stadium. and that whole situation.
Was to try to reassure people that they're not alone in their reaction. The thing about a guy like Bishop Strickland is that he has said and done a lot of things that I think people has been nurturing for them, to know that there are shepherds out there who will take a stand, sometimes poorly, admittedly, and sometimes imprudently, but at other times in a way that has been heroic also. I think a lot of us have bishops and shepherds who are hiding. You know, think about that controversy with, I don't even remember the name of that group, the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence, or that might not be it, but they were hosting some event at, I think it was Dodger Stadium. Forgive me, I'm not a baseball fan, I'm Canadian, whatever. But they were having some sort of an event there. These are people who openly mock the Catholic faith, the church, the body of Christ, Christ himself in turn. They were persecuting the church. And where were the shepherds? Where were the apostles? They were all in hiding as this was going on, except for Bishop Strickland. Now, you could say, well, that he shouldn't have done that. I mean, I could see both sides of that debate, but I think a lot of people were reassured by his presence and by his vocal support of them that this is wrong. These people shouldn't be allowed to say and do these things to heap scorn upon the body of Christ without someone at least standing there with Christ and praying and being willing to say, I'm part of that body of believers. Whatever you have to say about the church, here I am. I think a lot of people were encouraged by those kinds of actions. And so they have an affection and a love for Bishop Strickland. And they also have a desire that they wish their bishop was acting in that way as well. They wish their bishop was one of these people who was standing up and shepherding them and shielding them from that kind of abuse. And Strickland has been one of those people for them.
Well, this is so unfortunate because here it's very manifestly clear Brian is operating with incomplete information. Other shepherds did speak up. The Bishop of Los Angeles, where this occurred, is the very one who spoke up. Not only spoke up, but had a massive reparation going on while Strickland was doing these things, while he was there holding the prayer rally. And we heard more about Strickland and what he was doing than what the actual bishop of the territory was doing and his massive reparation and what the bishop said. And also Bishop Barron spoke up and said something. So there were other bishops. And so again, the very bishop in whose territory this occurred, which you would think that's probably the most important bishop that needs to speak up, is whenever this transgression occurs in this particular territory, that bishop needs to say something. Well, he did say something. Let me just show you right here on my screen one of many ways you can verify this piece of information. It doesn't seem that Brian was aware of this. And so again, we get a very different picture when we actually consider all of the facts. Nearly 2,000 attend LA Mass in response to Dodgers honoring sisters drag group. Los Angeles, Jose Gomez called for respect for belief of others at noon Mass hours before Los Angeles. When God is insulted, when the beliefs of any of our neighbors are ridiculed, it diminishes all of us. When we reward such acts, it hurts our unity as one city, one nation, and one family under God. And he goes on and has more comments on here. Jesus commands us to forgive those who trespass against us and pray for those who persecute us. And he taught us to oppose what is wrong and ugly and what is beautiful and true, just as he did, with what is beautiful and true, just as he did, and so on. And I'll put a link to that in the show notes. You can go and read his comments. Clearly, the bishop was doing the right thing, having a massive reparation, but that was overshadowed because all of the attention was on Bishop Strickland. And now another concern here is Bishop Strickland said the nuncio told him one of the reasons he was relieved is a lack of fraternity with his brother bishops. Now, going into the territory of another bishop, usually historically is not to be done. You as a bishop are not to go into the territory of another bishop without their consent. Now, it's a little looser these days, but it's generally courteous to let that other bishop know. Now, when the bishop is holding a mass of reparation, perhaps it would have been better for Bishop Strickland to go and attend that mass of reparation in Los Angeles. So again, all this was overshadowed because of Strickland's presence in Los Angeles. And I'm not saying that he intended to overshadow the bishop of that territory. And I'm not saying he was intending to be discourteous. And I'm not saying any of that, but that's the impression we get. And then also, once again, other bishops did stand up. Bishop Barron was very, very vocal about this issue. Here's just one of many places where you can go to verify that. This is here in just secular news on Fox News. I'll put a link to this in the show notes, but I'll share my screen just so you can see. Exclusive: Bishop Barron calls for Dodgers boycott. So he was calling to boycott them explicitly, and citing team's support of an anti-Catholic drag queen group. And so again, there were bishops who stood up, and in fact, the bishop of that territory stood up. But it seems that Brian does not know that information. So he was under the impression Strickland was the only one that did it. And people were expecting their shepherds to say something, but none of the other shepherds said something. That's not true. Now, this is just one example where I've noticed Brian is operating with very, very incomplete information. As we progress through this video, I'll demonstrate that over and over again. Which is why, again, I say I think Brian's a good guy. He's just operating with very incomplete information. And perhaps that's not the wisest thing to do whenever we're going on YouTube. We're taking a side. We're saying things critically about another side when we haven't yet evaluated all of the evidence. That's why I encouraged him. I think he needs to do that. And I think he also needs to show to his audience the information that he's interacting with. Like, for example, you notice what I'm doing here live. I'm pulling up Brian's video. I'm showing you what he said. I'm not just telling you what he said. And then that could perhaps cause some confusion because I might misrepresent him. I'm showing what he said, and then I interact with it, and then I show you counter evidence, and I pull it up on the screen. Brian, unfortunately, doesn't do that for the most part. He doesn't generally bring up any kind of counter evidence for the most part, doesn't generally show it on the screen, doesn't generally show the person that he's interacting with. He certainly didn't show videos of me. And unfortunately, that did cause him in a few instances to misunderstand some of the things that I was saying. So let's perhaps move on to the next part here. Let's go to the 9-minute 34-second mark where Brian once again just completely misses it because I don't think he's aware of all the facts. Brian explicitly is under the impression that Bishop Strickland was not told why he was removed from ministry. And even Bishop Strickland himself has dispelled us of that misinformation. And he did so prior to Brian posting this claim, well in advance. Bishop Strickland has shown us in his EWTN The World Over interview several days ago, he explicitly went through the reasons that the Vatican gave him whenever the Nuncio sat him down and told him, here's the reasons why you're being dismissed. So he was given specific reasons. Brian does not appear to be aware of that because he says, Strickland wasn't given any reason. And that's very concerning to me for anybody who doesn't know all of the facts. They're going to get the impression that what Brian is saying is true and it's not accurate. Let's watch it together. It's something that occurs all throughout the video, but this is the first time we see it. Let's watch it.
And to see him get dismissed unceremoniously without any explanation as well, I think it was just shocking for people, and it breeds disillusionment as it does for me. And so I wanted to say to people, I hear you and I identify with you, and here's how I'm coping with that disillusion.
And to be charitable to Brian, here he doesn't tell us if he's referring to a lack of transparency for all of us or to Bishop Strickland. But later on in the video, as we progress through it, it will be clear that he's saying that even Bishop Strickland wasn't told the reasons for his dismissal. So he would appear to be both saying that we weren't told the reasons for why he was dismissed, and Strickland wasn't told the reasons. Both of those claims aren't true. The Vatican did give us on, what was it? It was November 10th. Yeah, November 10th. It explicitly told us 2 reasons on why he was removed. I admit they could have been more detailed. It was pretty vague, but they did give some 2 general reasons. And the day prior to that, according to Bishop Strickland himself, he was told by the Nuncio an entire list of reasons for why he was removed. And it wasn't new to him. It was things that he had been warned about in advance for several years now. So it did not come out of nowhere. According to Strickland, he's admitted all this in his video interview on The World Over, which I reviewed yesterday. Now, again, Bishop Strickland posted all of that information prior to Brian posting this video last night. So in other words, Brian was in a position to have known this. I don't think he got the memo. I don't think he was aware. That tells me that Brian is operating with incomplete information. And I would just caution Brian and anyone else, if until you have all of the facts that you could, with any kind of moral certitude that you could possibly ascertain, it's probably best to avoid commenting on the subject. I don't think it's wise to comment on something until you've done due diligence. And this was something easy to access and find out. So I just kind of feel like perhaps it's best to not comment on it until you've taken everything into account. So I again will perhaps refer people the long list of reasons he was given by the Nuncio. I covered in my video last night where I reviewed Bishop Strickland's interview on The World Over. If you want more details on it, maybe just go and watch that video rather than me reproducing it here. Okay, let's let's go to the 10-minute mark. And by the way, I do want to say this. One of the reasons why the Vatican was a little vague in some of the reasons, it did give us some reasons publicly, but it was a little vague and not as detailed as I would actually like. One of the reasons why it was that way is because generally, whenever someone is removed from ministry, the specific details aren't generally given publicly, and that is so that the bishop can save face. Now, Bishop Strickland has chosen to tell us about some of those reasons in his interview with The World Over. But, that's kind of where it's coming from. The Vatican generally lets the bishop save face. And there also could be some things that the Vatican knows that it took into account, and it could be something very sensitive, very vulnerable, and it would be best to not bring it up publicly. There could be some of that going on, but at the very least, it's generally so that the bishop can kind of save face on the reasons. Okay, so let's go to the 10-minute mark. And there was an interesting comment that Brian offers here about how he's not attempting to hold some kind of trial and and really evaluate these things and come down and make a judgment. But I guess one of my concerns here is that I agree with Brian. He probably hasn't engaged much in a YouTube trial on this subject, but unfortunately, he's already made judgments without a trial. And that's part of the problem. It's very clear that he has favored Strickland and then made accusations against the Vatican that are faulty and are based on misinformation. So perhaps it would be good for Brian to have this YouTube trial rather than just simply bypass that step and go ahead and say the Vatican is guilty, Pope Francis was rash, Pope Francis shouldn't have done this, and so on and so forth. Let's watch that part together.
Here's how I'm staying committed to my faith, to the church that I love, and even to the Pope. And I hope that has been edifying for people. What I'm not doing is holding trial and weighing all the evidence and saying this is why Bishop Strickland is at fault and why it's justified to remove him. I don't have the authority to do that. I don't have the expertise to do that. I think Michael Lofton has done an impressive job of doing that, and I certainly wouldn't want to be an opposing counsel in such a trial against him. In fact, I think he did a better job of that than apparently the Holy See or the Nuncio did in whatever explanations they provided. It doesn't seem like any of the things that Michael said were the actual reasons that the Holy See has provided. Those of us who might want to hold our little YouTube trials, we'd only be speculating about what the actual reasons are. None of us actually know, which is why none of us can really say whether it was definitely just or unjust. But I do feel that there was an abuse of power.
All right, so let me stop there. So again, he's confident there was an abuse of power, and as we progress through the video, he's very clearly making judgments in favor of one side and against another. But he did so admittedly without a trial and without weighing all the evidence. And that's the problem. I would just simply caution, Brian, don't make those accusations. Don't make those judgments. Don't comment on it because you haven't accounted for all of the facts. Yes, you're not engaging in a trial. That's the problem. You've bypassed the trial and you've issued a judgment and you've issued a sentence against the Vatican and in favor of Strickland, and you didn't even hear both sides of the story. It would be like a judge who just rules in favor of one side against the other without even hearing the evidence and without even holding a trial. And it would be like the judge saying, well, you know what, I'm not qualified to have a trial here. So, you know, you're right and you're wrong. Well, hold on. But if you're going to issue a judgment, you're the very one who should be holding a trial. So if Brian doesn't want to go through all of that, I totally understand. If he wants to take his channel a different direction, that's cool. That's fine. I'm not knocking that, but just don't weigh in on these questions and issue a judgment and issue criticisms that are very clearly based on misinformation and incomplete information in other cases. So it's a little bit of a concern of mine. Now, there was that thing where he said, you know, and he says a couple times in the video that I did a better job than the Nuncio in the Vatican at explaining why Strickland was removed. That's not exactly accurate. Everything that I've brought up, the Vatican also addressed with him, almost everything. Already addressed with him, and that came out in his interview with The World Over, where Strickland tells us what the Nuncio told him before the news broke. So Strickland found out about this before the news broke. He was told the reasons. He was given a very long list. It could be that everything that I've said was on that list, but I can at least substantiate now, according to Strickland, almost everything that I've brought up was also confirmed by that list from the Nuncio. So it's not that I've somehow made a better case. It's that the Vatican hasn't necessarily come out and given us that full list, but it has given that list to Strickland, and Strickland has now told us of some of those things, which has backed up what I've been telling you all along. So let's maybe move on to the next part. Let's go to the 11-minute mark, 11 minute, 11 seconds, which is kind of where we're at. So we'll just start right around 11:07.
That took place here, and I think that a lot of people have that sense. So why do we feel that way? I think, for one, we see a massive inconsistency in the application of justice, and a massive inconsistency in the way that people will jump to the defense of that application of justice. For example, so Michael brought forward a letter that several theologians and a few bishops had signed, including Bishop Strickland, that implicates the Pope in heresy, which he claims you can't do. You can't do that without consequence. With that said, though, and forgive me for this little digression, but the guys on Avoiding Babylon did a quick episode about this last night, which, by the way, I haven't come across their stuff before, but it was entertaining to watch. They seem like they're operating a great show there, so go check them out and subscribe to them. But they had pointed out, and I haven't verified this myself, but that Michael Lofton apparently has signed such a document back in 2019 accusing the Pope of heresy. I can't defend if that's the case. This is the first I had heard about it. But if that's true, I imagine Michael would say, well, hold on, I don't actually hold to that position anymore. Okay. So what you're saying is that if you had the chance to explain yourself, you would appreciate that rather than simply having consequences imposed on you. And I think that that's what we would have hoped to have seen in the case of Bishop Strickland. That
all right, let's maybe stop there. Yeah, this part was so unfortunate because Brian was presenting this as if it's news, and I know most of y'all who are frequent watchers of the channel are probably laughing at this point because it wasn't Avoiding Babylon who broke that news. Guess who actually broke that news? You're looking at him. Me, several years ago, and multiple times I've come on this channel. I'm the one who told people I signed a document. Brian didn't even get the facts straight. It was not 2019. That's incorrect. So, and he admits he didn't really look into it. And I would say, well, this is another example. Don't comment on things you don't know, Brian. It's another example. Brian, I'm the one who brought this to my accuser's attention. My accusers from Avoiding Babylon and others, they only know about it because I'm the one who brought it up for the last several years. And I have publicly retracted that. I have also publicly told everyone I've gone to confession and I've had those censors removed. So I'm in 100% communion with the Catholic Church in good standing. Unfortunately, Bishop Strickland has not, to our knowledge, retracted his accusations of heresy against the Pope. He has not, to our knowledge, gone to confession over those things because he hasn't told us any of those things. And so there's a little bit of a difference there because I have repented of those things and I have retracted them. And I'm the one who brought it to everybody's attention. Now, this is a little unfortunate that he gave a plug for Avoiding Babylon and gave an endorsement to their channel. Perhaps Brian doesn't know. Well, the very video that he gave a plug to and an endorsement to has all kinds of slanderous lies and accusations against myself. So it's a little unfortunate that he gave an endorsement to that. I think that's unfortunate again. But I have already shown here on this channel that Avoiding Babylon unfortunately has engaged in explicitly lying against me. Let me show you a video that I've done about Avoiding Babylon right here. It's called Avoiding Babylon's Lies. I'll put a link to it in the show notes so you can go and watch it in its entirety. So I'm not going to be responding to their most recent slanderous video because it's just more of the same misinformation, lies, slander, all that. And here's my thing. If I already have shown you that, you know, these guys engage in lies and slander, that should be enough. I shouldn't have to go through and show you that they're continuing to do that. At that point, you should know they're disqualified and you really shouldn't trust anything that they say. But here, Anthony from Avoiding Babylon, as I've demonstrated, says, Michael Lofton wants you to pretend that a man in a dress is a woman and that two men can consummate a marital union. And this is just one among many vicious and slanderous lies. It's a little comical because it was actually, I think it was the day before they said that I did a video specifically going against transgenderism and things like that. And I have many videos refuting the transgender agenda or the homosexual agenda, quite a few things doing that. So I just thought this is so comical because anybody who knows anything that I say knows that this is just vicious slander. And it's not like this was the only instance and this is kind of a slip up or something. No, unfortunately, that there's a habitual pattern of doing this. And so my whole point is, if you're going to engage in this kind of behavior, and I show that, unfortunately, a person is bearing false witness, not telling the truth, engaging in this kind of action and behavior, I honestly think that that person is discredited moving forward, and thus it's not even necessary for me to address my accusers and what they say about me in the future. So God bless them. I certainly have been praying for Anthony, avoiding Babylon, and all my other accusers. I've been praying for them that they will just see what I've seen, because I've been in their position. I've thought the way that they think. I would be saying the exact same things that they're saying about Bishop Strickland and all that they're defending. If it weren't for the grace of God, I'd still be saying those things. I used to be among them. Like I said, as I've told y'all before, I did sign a document saying Pope Francis teaches heresy. I was very, very vocal against Pope Francis. That actually gives me more credibility, because it shows that I've been there. I know what they think. I know why they're thinking it. And yeah, I'm in a better position that most of these guys are, because I know what they think, why they think it, but they haven't considered my position and why I changed, and what I've considered that has shown me differently. So they're actually at a disadvantage. But again, look, I have stood by the very same advice that I give to others. If you're publicly accusing the Pope, I think that you should restore his good name. And that's what I've been doing for years, because I did publicly accuse the Pope in the past. And so I've been doing everything that I can in penance, and also to help others and give them guidance to restore his good name, and to tell people the truth. And so I certainly practice what I preach. Again, compare that, unfortunately, to Strickland, who has not retracted his signature. And that's what's concerning to me. And rather than addressing the fact that here we have a bishop violating the Eighth Ecumenical Council, and not anathematizing, but teaching or saying that Pope Francis teaches heresy in his magisterium, instead of really engaging that concern, the tactic here was, well, Michael, you're guilty of the same thing. It's a tu quoque, or also an ad hominem argument. At the worst, it just means, hey, we're both wrong. That doesn't justify it now, does it? And we still have to explain, well, yeah, why did Strickland do that? That's truly unfortunate. So I just kind of felt that this was uncalled for. It was a low blow, but it's also clearly because Brian is not operating with all of the facts first. But as we continue to see a habitual pattern of Brian operating with incomplete information, yet he is very confident in speaking on these things and making judgments on these issues that he hasn't really looked into sufficiently, I do think that undermines his credibility moving forward, unfortunately, because what it does is it shows there's a consistent pattern of not considering vital information. Yet Brian will still come on YouTube and make certain judgments, make certain accusations. It undermines anything in the future. People are going to have to scrutinize, I think, some of his claims a little bit more thoroughly, and they're going to have to start fact checking some of this stuff. Okay. Now let me go to the 12-minute 40-second mark. Let's talk about Strickland allegedly not being given an opportunity to retract some of his mistakes, because that was kind of the purpose of, or part of the purpose of Brian bringing this up. And I want to directly engage that claim.
Speech that he gave that you identified, some of his tweets, and this letter that he had signed, if he had been called to account for that, I suspect that he would have pledged his fidelity back to the church. If he had been shown that some of the things that he did were wrong and against canon law, and against his vows, or maybe schismatic or even heretical, I suspect he would have repented. But we'll never know, because he wasn't given that opportunity. Simultaneously, people like Marco Rupnik, people...
Let me stop there before I get into this next part. So, you know, what he's effectively saying here is that Bishop Strickland wasn't given an opportunity to retract. And if he was given an opportunity, and if you had shown him that, hey, this is wrong, he would most likely retract. Well, it's not entirely accurate, according to even Strickland himself. This is where, once again, Brian is operating with incomplete information. Strickland himself has told us in his EWTN World Over interview that he was given warnings about these issues several years in advance. He was given warning. He was also knowingly in disobedience to a papal decree. Again, that came out in the World Over interview. I reviewed that in more detail, so maybe go and watch that video. But this is not something that came out of nowhere. Bishop Strickland had been given the opportunity. He was warned, and these are just the warnings that we know of. Unfortunately, we're not getting the whole bit of information that has probably taken place behind the scenes, which I imagine probably includes some additional warnings that we haven't been told about yet. As the days progress, Bishop Strickland is telling us more and more and more about what happened, and we start to see it was a little bit more complicated than he initially led us to believe. I documented some of that yesterday. Not saying he intended to mislead anybody, but what I'm saying is that he did leave out some very key information initially. And now we find out, there's more to the story. And now I want to ask the question, okay, is there even more to the story we haven't considered? Maybe there were some additional warnings that we haven't been told about yet. Maybe there were some additional back and forths that we haven't been made aware of yet. There certainly were some already, according to his admission. So no, this did not come out of nowhere. It's not that he wasn't given an opportunity to retract. He had plenty of time, actually, now for several years on some of the issues that the Vatican relieved him from ministry over. Let's go to the 14-minute, 10-second mark where Brian is going to engage, the comments that Strickland made about a usurper as he's reading the letter where the person who wrote the letter said that Pope Francis is a usurper. Let's see what Brian has to say about that letter. Let's watch it together.
He has tried to clarify himself. A lot of people came jumping into the comments on my channel as a result of having watched Michael's video saying Bishop Strickland called the Pope a usurper and an anti-pope and a heretic. And I replied to some of those saying, like, what's your source on that? I realize that these documents exist and that speech exists, but it's not abundantly clear that he explicitly did that. And I suspect that if you asked him, or if the Holy See asked him about these things, he would say, no, I don't believe.
Somebody said they can't see the video. Hold on. Let me rewind this because I think we missed about 30 seconds now. Let me make sure that you can hear it too. Okay, let's start from right here.
A lot of people came jumping into the comments on my channel as a result of having watched Michael's video saying Bishop Strickland called the Pope a usurper and an anti-pope and a heretic. And I replied to some of those saying, like, what's your source on that? I realize that these documents exist and that speech exists, but it's not abundantly clear that he explicitly did that. And I suspect that if you asked him, or if the Holy See asked him about these things, he would say, no, I don't believe that Pope Francis is an anti-pope. I believe he's the legitimate pope. I shared that letter for a different reason. I suspect that's what he would say. And in fact, my suspicions were proved true because some people, like the Pillar, like Raymond Arroyo, have since asked him that question. And he did. That's precisely what he said. Now, you can still disagree and you can still say, well, it was still imprudent for you to have read that letter. And I kind of agree with that. But nonetheless, to go and accuse him of the absolute worst possible interpretation you can take on that, I think is uncharitable and unfair and inaccurate and therefore slanderous.
All right, a lot going on with that one. Okay, well, look, we need to start with, unfortunately, Brian came into my chat live on the last stream and was saying that I highly edited that letter, that I highly edited it to the point that I gave a very different impression. And that's just not true. Because before I edited anything, I showed the full thing so that people can clearly see whatever editing I'm doing here doesn't change anything. I've shown the full thing before first. Then I edited the video to make it more compact, because most people don't want to watch a video that's 15 minutes long. So to bring out the point that I was bringing, some of the problematic issues, I truncated it into something that it was a minute and a half, because unfortunately people like bite-sized things these days. And so there was nothing that substantially changed it if you watch the entire context. And I then even showed, after Brian accused me of that, I then even showed on the stream the full thing yet again. And in fact, everybody in the comment section said, wow, Michael, this is even worse than what you showed us in the edited version. This is even worse. And I'd agree, it is even worse. Now, unfortunately, Brian did not address that issue, that he did accuse me of editing the video to the point that it distorted things. And I asked him to retract that. Unfortunately, he didn't do that. Maybe he forgot or something. But I think that he does need to perhaps maybe offer a comment there, because some people are still operating under that impression that I somehow altered and edited a video that distorted things. And that's just simply not true. So it would go a long way if he could maybe show that that's simply not the case and concede that point. But that's okay. Even if he doesn't, we can move forward. Let's talk about that video. I certainly have never said that, it's certainly the case that, Strickland is a set of a contest because of the reading of that letter. That just was not my criticism. I offered 3 possible options, and I offered it every single time I've brought it up. I'll mention them again. I said either he didn't understand what he read, which, according to Strickland on The World Over 2 days ago, that turns out to actually be the case. That was option number 1. I said either he didn't understand what he said, or he agrees with everything in there, or he only agrees with some things in there and disagrees with others. I said those are the 3 options. So again, it turns out, according to Bishop Strickland, he's saying option number 1 is the issue. He didn't actually understand what was being read in the letter. He understood it in a different way. Now, I went ahead and reviewed that response that he gave on The World Over, and I then showed the video, and I said, I don't know if that fully accounts for what we observed here with him reading it. I showed some of the difficulties with it, but I'll let you be the judge. Go and watch that video yesterday where I review his interview. Be that as it may, again, I've never said, this means that he is a set of a contest. In fact, I said I personally suspect he's not a set of a contest, but he is sympathetic to disseminating this opinion. And that's what I've always said. Now, if there was some commenter who approached Brian and said otherwise, well, I can't speak for a commenter. But that certainly wasn't anything that I was saying. So unfortunately, Brian wasn't engaging my actual view. It seems like he was maybe engaging a random commenter or something like that. And I don't find that productive, because a random commenter isn't representative of me. We need to engage what I'm saying if this video is in reference to Michael Lofton. And again, according to his stream, it's responding to Michael Lofton. So you need to engage my view, not some random commenter. Let's go to the 15-minute, 53-second mark, and let's talk about the Pope's actions versus the Pope's words.
I've seen Lofton make explanations on behalf of things that Pope Francis has said and done, and said, look, he explicitly says that same-sex marriage is not compatible with our faith. He's taking the Orthodox position. But then he promotes bishops like McElroy. He hosts with all kinds of courteous fanfare people like Father James Martin and transgender activists in the Vatican. He says ambiguous things that could be interpreted and have been interpreted in ways by the secular media and any casual observer to mean he's fine with homosexuality, he's fine with same-sex marriage and all of these things. But then says, but no, the Orthodox position is true. Okay, fine. Why don't you apply that same benefit of the doubt when it comes to Bishop Strickland. So
okay, that's a legitimate question, but the answer is I do. I've been thoroughly consistent. I give Bishop Strickland the same benefit of the doubt I do Pope Francis. Show me an instance where I failed to do that, and I will be happy to retract that and to apologize for it and to set the record straight. So what I'm seeing here, unfortunately, from Brian is he is asking this question, why don't you give him Strickland the same benefit of the doubt that you do Pope Francis? He's asking that question as if I don't do that. And so what does that do with his audience? That's going to make his audience think, well, yeah, Michael's so inconsistent. But in reality, when have I not done that? I've done just that. Also, some of those headlines and some of the ways in which Brian presented that kind of shows me that maybe he hasn't heard the other side of the story and considered some other information. I've addressed all of that in my Recovering from Radical Traditionalism playlist, so I recommend people check that out. But yeah, again, the same benefit of the doubt that I give to Pope Francis, I do that with Bishop Strickland. So I would just say again, I'm left wondering why Brian is suggesting that I don't do these things when he hasn't looked into all of the evidence yet. It is misleading to the audience because it makes them think that I'm inconsistent here when, to my knowledge, I haven't been. And I would appreciate any feedback where somebody could point out an inconsistency, and I'd be happy to retract that and again afford Bishop Strickland the same benefit of the doubt that I do to Pope Francis. Okay, so let me go ahead and go to the next part here. Let's see here. We'll go to the 16-minute 46 mark. Where Brian kind of plays a thought experiment and says, okay, well, let's just go ahead and concede that Michael Lofton, is right on some of these points. What if, he's going to play out that scenario. Well, let's watch that together.
Michael said that I have to go through his entire case if I'm going to hold the position that I have apparently expressed. And if I can't rebut all of his points, then I should repent, or I should admit my mistake or concede the points that he has made. So let me say, what if I just conceded all of Michael's points and all of the arguments that he makes in his video? Is there nothing left for me to say in defense of the position that I hold and the affections that I have for Bishop Strickland? And
let me stop there. I will just simply say this is where I think it would be helpful if Brian showed what I actually said rather than try to reinterpret me and present it to his audience without showing my actual words. My thing is, I didn't exactly say that. There's actually a little bit more of a nuance to what I was suggesting there. But I think that if Brian would show a video of, me or whoever he's interacting with, he would be able to represent people a little bit more accurately, because you then have a video showing the person's words. In the exact same way I'm doing that with Brian. I'm not recapping and reinterpreting Brian. I'm showing you what Brian says and then interacting with it. I wish he had done that with me. It's a little unfortunate to see that, because this kind of changes what I was actually saying. But I'll simply note this. Yeah, if Brian does concede some of my criticisms, doesn't that still mean that Brian could still express some of his concerns and even some of his, reasons to like Bishop Strickland? Yeah, absolutely. And I've even said that. I've said I think that Bishop Strickland is a good guy, loves Jesus, and he's sincere. I just think that he has been misled by some people around him, not giving him the full side of the story and kind of giving him an altered view of Pope Francis. And I think he's also kind of bought into some of that stuff from Catholic media that unfortunately disseminates a lot of fake news. I documented a lack of awareness on part of Bishop Strickland I documented that even yesterday as I reviewed his World Over interview. And it was truly tragic to see that, because he seems to be unaware that Pope Francis actually agrees with a lot of what he says. So, I think Brian might realize if he and I probably just sat down and talk, we're probably in a whole lot more agreement. I'm probably much more sympathetic to what some of what he's saying than he might realize. And I think he would know that if he watched the channel more and heard what I said more, but it's okay. I understand people are busy, but that's where I kind of feel like, okay, but don't comment on this unless you've had a chance to kind of see where a person's coming from. Okay, let's move on to the next point, where he talks about a church of dialogue and raises some concerns that he has around the 18-minute, 7-second mark. Go ahead and share my screen.
And I think the reason it's so shocking for us who are observing, those of us who participate in the life of the church and who have been listening to the things that Pope Francis has been saying, what we hear is that the Pope wants a church of dialogue, a church of mercy, a church of synodality, a church of accompaniment, a church of listening. And yet these actions don't reflect that in the least. They don't even reflect.
All right, so yeah, let's maybe stop there. I would just simply say, look, Bishop Strickland was given many chances at dialogue. Unfortunately, according to Bishop Strickland himself, again, World Over interview, prior to Brian doing this information was available. Strickland was given chances at dialogue. He was warned by his superiors, or his superior. He unfortunately chose to ignore those warnings knowingly, according to his own admission, because he felt he was doing right by doing that. And I can certainly respect a man acting out of conviction. I just think he was wrong and misled, and it wasn't the right decision. And he also admits that he was directly disobedient to his superior. He explicitly admits that, knowingly, directly disobedient to Pope Francis and his papal decrees in some very vital particular areas. And so maybe again, go and watch that video with the World Over that I reviewed last night, and you'll see where I bring that out and I say, there you go. I mean, he's admitting it. And so there's that problem. And then also, unfortunately, it doesn't appear that Strickland was himself dialoguing with the Pope. I mean, he did accuse Pope Francis in this document of teaching heresy and desiderio desideravi. I don't know if there was a lot of dialogue on his part with the Pope, or if he just decided to do that publicly. Perhaps he could shed light on that. Undermining the Pope on your social media, critiquing the Pope, sharing, unfortunately, slander against the Pope, which again, I've documented all this on this channel, sharing information, calling Pope Francis a diabolical, disoriented clown, and sharing information saying that he doesn't exercise magisterial authority, and, just all kinds of very troubling things. I see a lack of dialogue on part of Bishop Strickland. So, all right, if we're going to raise the question of dialogue, was he really disposed to dialogue? I don't know. I don't get the impression that he was very disposed to that, and perhaps that's part of the problem. Now, I also think this is a little bit of a straw man, because the church does still give Bishop Strickland a chance for dialogue. He hasn't been laicized. He hasn't been excommunicated. He is still a bishop in the Catholic Church. He's just not over a particular diocese. So he still has dialogue. He still has plenty of that. And what it is, however, if you're directly disobedient to your superior and you're really failing to dialogue yourself, well, at some point your superior does have the right to remove you from ministry. So I kind of felt this part about, the Pope Francis talks about dialogue and he wants to be a church of dialogue, but he doesn't seem to be engaged in dialogue. I just feel like, I don't think that that's really appreciating all of the facts here. So I think we need to account for some other things. Okay, let's maybe go to the 18-minute 40-second mark, where he's going to speak about Pope Francis's letter to Cardinal Fernandez. We're right around there. Let me go ahead and skip forward to that. Okay, here we go.
To hear what's against him and for him to respond to it in a cordial way and even just a just way. I remember reading when Pope Francis had appointed Archbishop Fernandez as the new head of the dicastery for the doctrine of the faith. He said that in the past, he wrote a letter to him. He said that in the past, your dicastery has imposed itself in immoral ways, imposing this harsh and cold logic, asserting the truth of God. But what I want is a theology that reveals a God who loves, a God of mercy, and a God who saves and liberates people. Okay, so we want to move away from coldness, harshness, rigidness, and domination, and just asserting authority, and towards a theology that is in dialogue, that promotes listening and forgiveness and mercy. So when the Pope talks about the way that the Inquisition or that this dicastery had imposed itself in the past, well, how did it? When someone was suspected of heresy or of schism, what did the Holy Inquisition do? Well, it called them to account for that. If it suspected that there was a legitimate case to lay charges against them, it laid explicit charges against them. It had a threshold that and a burden of proof that it had to match in order to accuse somebody of wrongdoing and then to impose consequences on them.
All right, so this is again another unfortunate instance where I think it would have been more productive if Brian had brought up a copy of the letter and actually read it, because this is not very accurate in representing what Pope Francis was getting at. As I've reviewed that document directly, what Pope Francis is referring to specifically are situations where people were accused of heresy or excommunicated, not necessarily removing a bishop from his diocese due to disobedience, but rather just being too quick to accuse a person of heresy, and not kind of dialoguing with them to find out if they're a heretic or not, and just being too quick to excommunicate them, or put them under direct orders that they can no longer speak publicly, so they're literally silenced. That is more what Pope Francis was getting at, but unfortunately Brian interpreted that document very differently because he doesn't have it in front of him. He's not reading it directly and kind of seeing the nuances that are taking place there. And so again, there's a massive difference between Bishop Strickland, who again kind of failed at dialogue himself, and also by his own admission was engaging in very serious acts of disobedience against the Holy See. There's a big difference between that and what Pope Francis is addressing, which is accusing a person of heresy or something like that. Strickland has not been accused of heresy by the Vatican. Strickland has not been told you must be silent, you can no longer speak. Strickland has not been excommunicated. Strickland has not been laicized. None of that has taken place. So I just kind of felt that this is a little bit of a straw man, but it's mostly because Brian doesn't have the document in front of him to kind of be aware of what is actually being said. We see a continuation of that misunderstanding spilling over into this next part. Watch this.
Take someone like Martin Luther, who is infamous in Catholic history. This is a person who called the Pope the Antichrist, and who ruptured Christendom in catastrophic ways. He was given a hearing. He was given opportunities to explain, what did you mean by that? What is the actual position that you hold? He was given plenty of opportunities to explain himself. And when he wouldn't repent, when he was invited to do so, then he was excommunicated. Or in more recent history, how about
so again, this is misleading because it's not like this was from nowhere. He, again, according to Strickland, he admits he had been given opportunities to take it a different direction and cool it on social media and make some changes. He was given that. But again, there's a very big difference between the two situations with Martin Luther. Martin Luther was excommunicated. We're not talking about Bishop Strickland being excommunicated. We're just talking about removing him from exercising authority in that diocese due to direct disobedience and not listening to multiple warnings for several years now. That's a very different situation. Strickland hasn't been excommunicated. Now, if Strickland was excommunicated, then the analogy would hold. Now, So I felt that part was, again, pretty misleading. We're going to see it spill over even to this next part with Lefebvre.
Someone like Archbishop Lefebvre, who I'm sure, Michael, you would agree, was justly excommunicated. Well, there was a ton of dialogue. There was a ton of back and forth between the Curia, between the Pope even, and Archbishop Lefebvre. Ratzinger, as the head of the doctrine of the faith, had a lot of back and forth trying to reconcile the SSPX back with the church. And in the event that he understood what he was accused of, and he refused to repent, they excommunicated him.
Right, that's an excommunication. That's not just simply removing him from exercising authority as bishop over a diocese. Brian's admitting this is a very different situation. Again, if Bishop Strickland had been excommunicated, I could get on board with what you're saying. I would say, okay, at that point, I think we might need to have an actual trial here. You know, yeah, I could totally get on board with what he's saying if he was excommunicated. He hasn't been excommunicated. He hasn't even been silenced. So I don't think this analogy holds. But I do know it probably has a lot of emotional appeal to people. But I just want to think through it a little bit more carefully. Now, here's a off the cuff comment that he makes here. Say off the cuff. It's probably off the cuff, but Brian's videos are edited, so there is now forethought in them because he could choose to remove this stuff. So here's a curious part where he makes a comment about Pope Francis.
To be honest, that sounds a lot like dialogue. That sounds a lot like listening. This church of the past that Francis seems to hold so much resentment towards. That's a process of doing so, and it's a process of justice. You know, I'm not a big fan of Western Republican justice, like the justice system that you might find in the United States or where I live in Canada. But at the very least, these indifferent, impersonal institutions will give people charged of heinous crimes like murder and rape and abuse and robbery and theft and fraud and everything else you can think of. They will at least afford them some rights to say, here's what you're charged with. What do you have to say for yourself? Do you want to mount a defense? We're going to give you a hearing of the...
Let me address the comment there that Brian made about Pope Francis resenting the church of the past. Look, Pope Francis doesn't resent the church of the past. I mean, he's expressed resentment towards abuses, and I think we should all get on board with that. But aren't such comments like that, isn't that holding a trial against Pope Francis, or rather bypassing the trial and just convicting Pope Francis? Again, Brian wants to say, look, you know, I'm not trying to hold a YouTube trial. Well, it's worse than that. He hasn't held a YouTube trial. He's bypassed it. He's already convicted Pope Francis of being guilty in some areas. And I want to say that's too rash. You need to, if we're talking about being a listening church and we're criticizing Pope Francis for failing to listen, I think we too need to ourselves listen to Pope Francis a little bit more. I think maybe Brian needs to do some listening to Pope Francis. I feel like he's not doing enough listening, and therefore that is distorting some of his understanding of what is taking place. Let's continue with this part about Strickland. He once again kind of takes this position that Strickland is not really told what were the reasons for his removal. And again, this is just factually not true.
Will give people charged of heinous crimes like murder and rape and abuse and robbery and theft and fraud and everything else you can think of. They will at least afford them some rights to say, here's what you're charged with. What do you have to say for yourself? Do you want to mount a defense? We're going to give you a hearing of the public with transparency so that we can assess, you know, are these charges justified? And if so, then we'll impose a conviction and then consequences. But the church isn't some cold, indifferent institution. It's supposed to be a family governed by spiritual fathers who can't even, apparently in this case, observe decent norms of justice. I think this is why we need to bring excommunication back. Excommunication is supposed to be pastoral. It's supposed to be medicinal. It's supposed to be able to say, You have excluded yourself from the boundaries of the church, from this family, and we want you to come back. Here's the path back. But in the case of Bishop Strickland, there was no path to reconciliation because he didn't even know what he was charged with. And none of us know what he was charged with. There was no canonical process according to the norms that the Pope has defined. They just got rid of him.
That's just factually not true, according to even Strickland. This is again where Brian is just operating with really incomplete information. He says that, he just wasn't told. He just didn't know why he was removed. Not according to Bishop Strickland. Bishop Strickland, on the world over, an interview that was available to Brian before he posted this thing, well in advance available to him, Bishop Strickland says that on November 9th, which was the day before the announcement was made, on a Thursday, he was called into the Nuncio's office, and Cardinal Pierre told him and gave him a long list of reasons. And they weren't out of nowhere, according to Strickland himself. Strickland himself said, yes, I was told and warned about these things in advance, but I just feel in good conscience I need to continue to say what I'm saying. And I also feel in good conscience I can't obey this papal decree. He did so knowingly, full consent. So this is, again, I just don't understand why Brian is feels the need to comment on a situation where he clearly hasn't done due diligence. And it's at this point, I think, harming his credibility severely, because if we can get this situation so distorted and not account for very basic facts, you have to start to ask, well, what else is Brian saying that has not accounted for some very basic things that would give us a very different outcome if we had accounted for them? So I just think that's unfortunate. I'll just simply end with this, that I understand Brian says in his video that he's not going to go back and forth and do any more. Oh, okay, that's cool. I totally respect that. And he's certainly not obligated to come back and say anything else. I think it's pretty clear what the situation is. But I would say if he does want to come and follow up, even here on this channel, if he wants to put something in the comment section, I'll pin that comment. Or if he wants to come on this channel, I've given him an invite. He's had that invite for a long time. He has my contact information. Hey, Brian, you're always welcome on the channel. Love to have you, brother. Think you're a good man. Think you love Jesus. I think you and I could have a productive conversation. So, hey, if you ever want to do that, look, you would be treated very charitably, very respectfully, certainly willing to have you at any time. I think you would enjoy it. But even if you don't want to take me up on that, that's fine. You're not obligated to. Nobody is obligated to do that. And Brian's not obligated to call me up privately. I'm not obligated to call him up privately. This is public information that he is perfectly free to engage publicly. I'm free to engage public comments as well. That all's fine. I just ask that if somebody engages something publicly, that you just factor in all of the details, all of the facts first. That's kind of all I'm saying. But yeah, I mean, if he doesn't want to come on the show, that's fine. If he wants to leave a comment, I'll pin it. He's certainly able to comment here on this channel. And if he doesn't want to do that, he doesn't want to say anything, that's fine. That's cool. I think that we kind of have enough information to know what's what at this point. So anyways, I hope that this was helpful. I do want to say that this is just not true. Why did Brian get blocked from the chat? He's not blocked. That's in fact why you can see in the last video Brian has a comment in the comment section under the pinned comment. It's because he's not blocked. So that's just not true. So please stop disseminating false information. So anyways, I hope this was helpful. If it was, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button. Check me out, patreon.com/Reason Theology. If you want to support me and get access to extra content, or check me out at the GoFundMe link or PayPal link there in the show notes if you want to support me that way. I would truly appreciate any help that you can offer, and certainly any prayers for myself, for the channel, and for, hey, Bishop Strickland too. So, all right, we'll see you later. God bless. Are you a Catholic? Are you thinking about converting to Eastern Orthodoxy? Or are you a Protestant discerning whether or not to become Catholic or Eastern Orthodox? If so, I have the book just for you. It's called Answering Orthodoxy, and engages all of the arguments that Eastern Orthodox use against the Catholic Church. I respond to all of them. I show that they are in error, and in fact, they're inconsistent, because the things that Orthodox are objecting to are in fact found in their own tradition. So the fullness of the faith can only be found in the Catholic Church. Check out the book right now at shop.catholic.com for your copy today. Hey everybody, just wanted to tell you about my new free ebook, Church Chaos, Biblical Insights for Confused Catholics. If you are a confused Catholic and you're thinking about leaving the Catholic Church, or you're thinking about converting to the church, but you see that there's a crisis in the church and you're just unsure, this is the book for you. Again, it is free. Just simply go to reasonandtheology.com. You'll see a pop-up that comes up on your screen. Just simply click on it and you'll put in your email and it will provide you the free PDF ebook right then and there. Please check it out if you're confused about the situation in the Catholic Church today. reasonandtheology.com.